There was a man who had two sons. This is the way Jesus begins our story for today. But rarely has anyone ever invited me to listen to this story with all three characters in mind. In fact, folks encouraged me to listen to this story from the perspective of one or two of these characters, but not from all of their perspectives. This story was first introduced to me, and perhaps to you, as the parable of the prodigal son. And of course, it is the youngest son who possesses the starring role in this version of the story. And I think it is this version of the story that plays in the minds of most Christians. It is so popular that many of us think that the story ends when the youngest son comes home smelling like a pig to be the guest of honor in a party that his father throws for him. This is the tantalizing version of this story for all of us at some point. Secretly dream of what it might be like to be far away in a far country where no one knows our names, with lots of cash to squander in riotous living. For all of us, I think, have a very personal and lively vision of what that youngest boy did in that far country. For many years, I assumed that this story that Jesus is telling us this morning ended at verse 24. For no one bothered to introduce me to that elder brother, pitching a fit in the backyard by the barn, complaining vehemently about the party that his father has given this brother, indignant about how his brother has threw away their daddy's money, just like he would have thrown it away if he had been in that far country, right into the arms of a prostitute. This modified version of the parable becomes the story of the lost boys. Because finally we discover that this man did indeed have two sons. And so in the words of Gomer Pyle, surprise, 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 the story doesn't end until verse 32. There's also a version of this story we call the parable of the loving father. In this version, we focus on the papa of these two sons. We are mystified, we are even shocked when he gives his youngest boy what he wants, his inheritance. But we love our vision of the father standing on the front porch day after day, scanning the horizon for some sight of his younger son coming home. Tears fill our eyes when we envision this father running down the lane, taking this half-dressed, ragged skeleton in his arms, kissing him on his dirty cheek, and whispering into his ear, "Son, son, I thought you would never get home." Even today, there are those of us who wonder if anyone on this whole planet loves us enough to throw a party for us, given the shameful things we know we've done and they know we've done. So we hope that somewhere there is a father like the one in this story that Jesus tells, a compassionate, a loving, and a forgiving father. New Testament scholars tell us that the genius of the parable is that it has as many meanings as there are people listening to the story. It was for this reason that Jesus would say, "If you've got ears, listen to me." To understand a parable, scholars often encourage us, listeners, to find our place in the story. And we may have done that, discovering at different times that we are one of these characters. Perhaps you've heard this story and you've recognized that you were indeed the prodigal son who had been off into the far country. And perhaps sometimes you heard this story and you realize that you are that elder brother, angry that there's a party going on in the house for that stupid brother of yours. And perhaps you just hope in this story that someday you can love like the Father in this story. But this morning I want to describe for you where this story has taken me over the past couple of weeks into some new territory that I've never explored before. First, for the very first time, I think, I realize that this youngest son is simply a spoiled, selfish, self-centered, and manipulative child. And he never gets over it. He never gets past it, even when he decides to come home. He doesn't get over it, not even when he has lost everything: his new friends, his new clothes, and his riotous living. I came to this realization when I realized that when this boy came to himself in the far country, he came to himself only when he was about to starve to death. Only when he was faced with the reality that he might not survive did he think about going back home. Then and only then did he realize that it would be better to be a hired hand in his father's house than to die of starvation in this far country. And so he goes home rehearsing a speech, praying, I think, that he will sound just a wee bit sincere when he says it to his father. "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me now like one of your hired hands." And then when he gets home, he gets the surprise of his life. His father refuses to let him be a hired hand. He is the son of the father, and nothing is going to change that. And so the father welcomes him home by throwing a lavish party. Now, when you think about it, this boy couldn't have done any better if he had won the lottery in that far country. He's back home with all the privileges he had before. Now, this older son certainly has his problems. Over the years, for whatever the reasons, bitterness, resentment, anger, and hostility have rooted understanding and compassion and mercy and forgiveness right out of his heart. He doesn't even see himself as a son, though he still lives at home. But he sees himself living like a slave. And he is angry. His father may have one son home safe and sound from the far country, but that son that's come home doesn't have a brother. No sirree. At some point, his spirit has been wounded. Maybe he doesn't even know how or when his spirit was wounded, but it has blinded him. This deep hurt inside of him has blinded him. He cannot see anything but this brother of his that is a scoundrel. He can't see anything but this party that his father has thrown. And by the Godlings, hell will freeze over and he'll skate all over it before he will go inside to that party. Now, I haven't always seen these boys these ways. I have been more gracious to that youngest son at times, and I have been more understanding of that elder son at other times. But over the past couple of weeks, I've realized that I don't have a handle on this father at all. You see, it was the love of this father that created both of these boys. Both of them who were spoiled and selfish and self-centered and manipulative. His love created both of them. And for whatever reason, and it must have been a reason because I can't fathom what it might have been, he gives his younger boy what he wants. His inheritance. He lets him run off to a far country. He doesn't try to intervene. He doesn't try to save his son. He simply waits for that lost boy to come home. And when he does come home, well, they're still talking about that party. Still talking about it. This baby boy manipulates his father. He takes advantage of his father, throws away all his father has given him, and then comes home and takes the seat of honor at the party. The big brother doesn't understand his father. He asks for nothing. Nothing. Not even a goat to have a little party with his closest friends. When he should have known, given the experience of his brother, that his dad was an easy mark. Just ask him. You'll get it. That's what the younger brother would have told his elder brother. Just ask him. He'll give it to you. He feels slighted somehow. And he becomes a very, very angry man who refuses to give up his anger. Now, this is how I see the story ending today. Because Jesus never tells us how the story ends. We have to come up with the end ourselves. And this is how I see the story ending. There's that younger boy sitting in the seat in the place of the honor with a little smirk breaking across his face. He thinks he's gotten by with something. And there is the elder brother, still standing in the yard, glaring through the window, trying to get his brother's attention, promising that somehow, he will get even. But what about the father? Tragically, this father discovers that he has two lost boys. He now has two lost boys at home, and he loves them both. For he knows what it is to lay awake at night, fearful that one of them is lost forever, dead and buried somewhere in an unmarked grave. He's faced that fear. But now, tragically, he discovers that the child who stayed close to him, that child has been living in a far country too, where he has lost his soul, and maybe he is buried too, for his heart is overgrown with bitterness and anger and hostility. He knows nothing of the Father's love. Now, I said it's the genius of a parable that it doesn't wrap things up for us. Sometimes it disturbs us. It frightens us. And so there is no end to this story. We don't know how either boy turns out. So we're left to wonder today. What do you think? Do these two boys ever learn to live like sons in their father's house? Will they always be walking around each other, looking at each other with deep suspicions haunting their hearts? Will they always think that their daddy is naive? Will they ever understand that his love does appear to be indulgent? He gives the youngest boy what he wants. It does appear at times distant. The elder boy feels his father doesn't love him even though he's right there at home. And this love, at least from our perspective, is naive. And pardon me, little ears, but some people would say stupid. You should never say that word. Because he refuses to let sons be slaves. No matter what they've done. Squandered everything in riotous living, or buried their hearts in bitterness and anger and judgment and hostility. Will these two boys ever come to believe that it is this very love that looks so indulgent and distant and naive? This is the only love that possesses the power to truly set them free to find peace and love and joy. Jesus does not give us an ending for this story. And all week long, I have struggled to find an acceptable ending. But I'm not sure if I found one that satisfies me, nor will it even satisfy you. You see, I think that most of us have a problem with this Father whose love is indulgent and compassionate and merciful and naive. You see, we have been to the far country and we've come back to the Father's house because we thought we were going to die. We thought if we stayed in that far country, we would die. But this place doesn't feel like home. We still have too much shame and guilt and too many regrets to accept that we are a beloved child of God. And there are others of us. We've been doing our best to be good people, good Christians all of our lives. And we look at our brother and all we see is this indulgent Father, and we don't understand His compassion and His mercy. And so we sit here, judging our brothers and sisters who have been to the far country and come home. And we are going to be sure it never feels like home. Because we're going to remind them, if we can, of their guilt and their shame. The Father may give them a place of honor at the party, but we will not. We are older brothers and sisters. I wonder what happened to these two boys. Did that older son's anger and resentment and hostility toward his brother and toward himself and toward his father, did it ever go away? And what happened to that youngest boy? Did he go to the party? Or did he slip into the dining room and take some food and pawn that new ring he had for a little cash and take off for far country again? Did these two boys ever understand that they are beloved children and nothing could change it? And so the question comes to us this morning from this story: can we go home and know that I am a beloved child of God, you are a beloved child of God, we are all beloved children of God? Can we come home and believe that the love of this Father embraces us all? And yes, at times it appears indulgent and distant and naive, but that's the only daddy you have to come home to. He's the only one who truly loves you. And the only place, this home, where there is peace and joy